Hello friends, happy Saturday, or as I like to call it, day. My name's Cindy, I'm with the Circuit Riders. I hope you got that quarantine joke, that one was for you. I don't know about you guys, but I know in this time has been a bit of a refiner's fire, and it's been so amazing, but the Lord asking the question of us, do we fully trust God? Do we fully put all of our strength, effort, everything into Him? That we would be people like in Psalm 16, when David says, apart from you, God, I have no good, I have nothing to offer. And that God is inviting us into a deeper level of trust. So we're going to jump into the Old Testament, and we're going to learn from the life of Jacob and a moment of wrestling of what it really looks like to surrender, to trust. So we're going to jump in. I'm going to just set up some context for you. In this storyline here, Jacob and Esau, they haven't seen each other in 20 years. Basically, Jacob, the deceiver, stole his birthright and blessing and deceived his father to get it. And he stole it from his brother Esau. And Esau obviously wanted to kill him. So Jacob flees. They haven't seen each other for 20 years. Jacob in this time has been building a family, a kingdom really, has become very prosperous, and is on his way back now to meet his brother for the first time in 20 years. And he made this plan to break up the group into two different camps. One to go forward with gifts to pacify his brother's anger, and the other one, him out of self-protection, falling back with his family and having kind of like a, if all else goes wrong, we'll just flee. That's his plan B. And so we're going to jump into the storyline. But it says in verse 22, that same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else he had. So I want to point out a couple of things here. First one is that God brought Jacob to a place of isolation. Sound familiar? So interesting that sometimes God has to bring us into a place where we can't look at our accomplishments, we can't look at the people around us, that we just have to look at God in order for Him to meet us and bring truth into our lives, to really deal with the things in our life. So He brings Jacob totally alone, away from his accomplishments, away from everything. Jacob couldn't sleep, that He brings him to a place to meet with Him. Next thing is God brings Jacob to a place of confrontation. And in verse 24, it says, and Jacob was left alone. A man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. So all night he is wrestling with God. He is wrestling with this angel that was sent. And it's so interesting that at this time, right before he's going on a word of the Lord to come back, and there were things in his life that had to be dealt with before he could fully enter into the promise of God, before he could enter into the promised land, before he could enter into the things that God has said, that he could see it with his own eyes, that there were roots that needed to be taken out of his self-reliancy, of how he depended on himself, his independence, his deception, that he would bring about things in his own strength, that those were the things that needed to be rooted out in this time. Number 3 is God brings Jacob to the end of himself. In verse 25, it says, when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint, and he wrestled with him. And in this, that Jacob, being so strong, so full of grit and will, that he would not surrender, he would not submit all night long, that he would not submit, and that it took the moment of breaking, of being crippled, to fully rely on God. And after this, right, he realizes, oh, plan B is not going to work. All the things I made, it's not going to work. I can't even run. I'm crippled. I can't flee. The ways that I've done things before, it's not going to work anymore. So he fully understands now that the only way that he can go forward is from a blessing from God. So he cries out. All night he's wrestling. He cries out of desperation, out of a place of being broken, and cries out and says, I will not let you go until you bless me. Until I get a blessing from God, I will not let go. Real hunger, real desperation. And in this moment is when God, he renames Jacob. And Jacob goes from being one who was deceptive, the heel grabber, and he goes to being the one who strives with God. The name Israel, one striving with God. And Chuck Smith puts it this way. He says, the name change indicates the change of nature. You're no longer to be a self-governed, clever heel catcher, but you're now to be a man whose life is governed by God, Israel. And it indicates the change of character. Actually, it is the new birth. It's being born again. No longer being mastered by self, by the flesh, and now being mastered by the Spirit of God. Living now a life after the Spirit. What a beautiful blessing. It's so interesting that this is the only blessing that came from surrender, that came from submission, from laying everything else down, that I have nothing good to offer. I can't, deceive my way out of this one. I have nothing, but I have to fully rely and fully submit. And that in that submission, in that surrender, was the blessing that literally shaped Israel, that brought forth the nation of Israel, that birthed the coming Messiah. That this life change, this moment with God changed everything for him, this full surrender. It brought about reconciliation in his life. It made Jacob a man of generosity who blesses Joseph's sons. That brings about the promised Messiah. And what if in this moment, the Lord is saying to us, in the midst of a pandemic, you can go no further without being fully reliant on me. The invitation is to full dependence on God. Full dependence, everything of our lives, being fully and fully surrendered. That this is what it means to be a Christian, is to give up our life, to actually surrender everything, that my life is not my own, but everything belongs to Christ. So with this, I want to give you guys the next action step of, what does it mean? What does it look like for me to be fully surrendered? And it starts with being with God. Get alone with God today. Let him search your heart and ask that question. Is there anything in my life, anything in my heart that I'm holding on to, that is hindering me from entering into the promises that you've spoken? Anything of how I'm relying on myself. And in that, don't let him go until you can fully say, the Lord is my chosen portion and my cup, that he holds my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. So I love you guys. I'll be praying for you today, and be blessed. See you soon.